It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
You're listening to Killer Communications, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, DNA ID, Campus Killings, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
Welcome to the Season 1 finale of Killer Communications. When we last left off, Paul Freshour had just finished a writing test comparing his handwriting to that of the mysterious Circleville letter writer. While the methods have been deeply criticized over the years, the writing test was deemed enough evidence in 1983 to connect Paul with the Circleville letter writing campaign, and he was charged for the attempted murder of his ex-sister-in-law, Mary Gillespie. Chapter 1. A Trial. Despite the handwriting test being approved by the Ohio courts, Paul was not officially charged with being the Circleville letter writer, as there wasn't enough definitive proof. However, when police asked how his gun had found its way into a booby trap seemingly meant for Mary Gillespie, Ron's only suggestion was that someone must have stolen it out of his garage. He had no idea who, though, and had no leads to follow, so Paul was the only viable suspect. After getting a warrant to search his garage, Sheriff Radcliffe turned all the evidence over to the court, and Paul Freshour was arrested and charged with attempted murder on the grounds that his handwriting matched the handwriting on the sign, and his gun was in the booby trap. His trial began on October 24, 1983, and though no one in the prosecution claimed that Paul was the letter writer, 39 of the Circleville letters were used as evidence in the trial. The prosecution also put a handwriting expert on the stand who testified that the writing on the booby trap sign and several of the Circleville letters and envelopes had all been written by the same person, Paul Freshour. And while Paul had a solid alibi on where he'd been on the day Mary Gillespie found the booby trap, several of Paul's co-workers testified that he had not gone to work that day, which looked damning to the jury. Paul didn't take the stand in his own defense, and despite not having any forensic evidence to tie him to the case, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to 7 to 25 years in prison. The town wanted the letters to stop, and if Paul Freshour had made the sign and rigged a booby trap, it stood to reason that he was the only person who could have been capable of writing all those letters. With Paul Freshour behind bars, the town hoped everything would get back to normal, but they'd be in for a terrible shock. Chapter 2. More letters. If anything, with Paul Freshour in jail, the letters seemed to come more frequently and encompassed a much farther distance. According to journalist Martin Yant, the letters were being received all over a large area of central Ohio. So a lot of people couldn't understand how Paul Freshour could be mailing all these letters from prison. It became so bad that Sheriff Radcliffe made several official complaints to the prison warden, but the warden claimed there was no way Paul Freshour could be mailing letters. For starters, he was serving his time in Lima, which was across the state from the Columbus postmark on all the letters. Secondly, Paul had been placed in mostly solitary confinement, and he had no access to paper or writing implements. Full-scale investigations inside the prison were conducted 3 times, and no letters from Paul were ever discovered to be in the prison system. But the letters kept coming. And at the 7-year mark of Paul's incarceration, despite being a model prisoner and never being officially charged as the letter writer, he was denied parole on account of how many Circleville letters were still flooding the state. And in a twisted form of irony, only 2 days after being denied parole, Paul received his own Circleville letter at the prison. The letter read, "Now when are you going to believe you aren't getting out of there? I told you 2 years ago. When we set them up, they stay set up. Don't you listen at all?" Though there was still no physical evidence connecting Paul to the letters, he spent another 3 years in prison before finally being released in 1994. All total, Paul was incarcerated for 10 years, and upon his release, he continued to proclaim his innocence until his death in 2012. But most interestingly, the Circleville letters officially stopped for good and were never seen again following Paul's release. They evaporated as mysteriously as they had arrived, and though there's still much speculation about who wrote them and for what purpose, the Circleville letter writer has never been identified. However, theories abound about who it could have been and why. Chapter 3. Theory 1. Paul Freshour was the letter writer. Despite little forensic evidence, most theories still purport that Paul Freshour was responsible for the Circleville letters. For one, several letters were tested for fingerprints during the decade that Paul was in jail, and many of them were said to contain his fingerprints. If this is true, theory suggests that Paul had written these letters while on bail and awaiting trial, and had an accomplice mail them throughout the decade of Paul's incarceration. Other potential evidence can be found in the paperwork surrounding his divorce. In the proceedings, his ex-wife, Karen Sue, stated that at one point in 1981, she had found 4 sealed envelopes with the distinct blocky handwriting of the Circleville writer in their home. She claimed when she asked Paul about them, he said he had received them but hadn't bothered to open them. That same year, over the summer, she also found a sealed envelope in the bulky print, stuffed under the mattress of their bed. It was addressed to Anheuser-Busch, the company Paul worked for. When she asked him about that letter, he claimed that it had been a reference for someone at work, but they hadn't ended up needing it. But when she checked the next day, the letter was gone. Likewise, only a few weeks later, the family toilet was clogged, and their son Mark fished a crumpled up letter out of the toilet. In the same block handwriting, Karen Sue claimed she could just make out the address of a nearby church in the soggy paper, and was able to see Mary Gillespie's name on the letter inside. The envelope didn't have a stamp on it, so it hadn't come into the house from the mail service. And a few months after Ron Gillespie's tragic accident, Karen Sue found 4 letters in the same white envelopes as the Circleville letters in the trunk of Paul's car. In addition to her claims about the letters, Karen Sue explained in her divorce hearing that Paul was not the gregarious, generous, and fun-loving person most people saw him to be. She claimed he had a violent streak and was easily angered. According to her testimony, he had physically abused her several times in the first few years of their marriage, and he only stopped after she threatened him with a divorce. While they were married for 17 years after this incident with few issues, Karen Sue claimed they began fighting bitterly in the early 1980s, when Paul accused her of cheating on him. Their fighting also escalated around the second time the Circleville letters began appearing. During this time period, she moved out of the house, but at one point in October of 1982, she was back in the house, and Paul allegedly beat her up and held her broken glass bottle to her face, threatening to cut her. She claimed Paul was a very nice person until someone disagreed with him, and then he'd become irrational and violent. Karen Sue claimed that this pattern of behavior was also true when it came to Ron and Mary Gillespie. Prior to Ron's death, Paul was apparently very fond of his brother-in-law and sister-in-law. As we discussed last time in part 1 of this case, the couples frequently hung out, and Paul went to extreme measures to have Ron's death reopened as a homicide. But after Ron's death and Mary's subsequent relationship with William Massey, Paul allegedly stated things to Karen Sue, such as Mary was a goddamn slut, and that he wished Mary and William Massey would move out of Ohio if they were going to date. Karen Sue also alleged that once the letters started arriving, accusing Mary of adultery, that Paul began to believe that Mary really was cheating on Ron. As Mary's alleged affair was the letter writer's particular campaign for such a long time, It could stand to reason that Paul may have been the instigator of such a smear campaign if he felt his brother-in-law was being cheated on. On a more forensic level, the TV show 48 Hours covered the Circleville letters in 2021 and hired forensic handwriting expert Beverly East to weigh in on whether or not the writer was indeed Paul Freshour. East examined over 100 of the Circleville letters and Paul's handwriting from other documents, looking at the distinctive way he wrote numbers, as well as several other matches in individual pen strokes. After tabulating her findings, she stated she was 100% sure that Paul was the writer. This also backed up the conclusion of the handwriting expert in Paul's trial. While this all seems very powerful, there's also a lot of evidence that seems to refute Paul Freshour. For one, he was under 24-hour surveillance for the 10 years he spent in prison, with no access to paper or writing implements. No one at the prison ever saw him write a letter, and there was no way he could have sent one from prison without it going through the prison mail system. So unless he did have someone on the outside, or a guard inside that was helping him in some way, it seemed there's very little chance that he was the letter writer between 1984 and 1994. And as far as Paul's family is concerned, they refute much of the personality disorders Karen Sue alleged in the divorce proceedings. Paul didn't have a history of violence or anger issues, nor was he a morally staunch individual who would have cared so deeply about Ron and Mary's relationship that he would resort to this letter writing campaign. Likewise, his family claims that the reason Paul gave very little information to police about his missing gun may have been because his son Mark had stolen it, and he didn't want to incriminate one of his children. Also, according to divorce documents, Paul claimed that Karen Sue was the mentally unstable one. He claimed that she had tried to take her own life 4 times via suicide, using various methods, and often threatened her children. As Paul was awarded custody of the children, as well as the house and most of the assets at the end of the divorce, it's possible that many of Karen Sue's claims were not based in facts, and rather she was seeking payback. But one of the largest pieces of evidence is a profile presented by former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, who was hired by 48 Hours. In their interview, O'Toole looked at 98 of the Circleville letters and profiled the writer as someone who was not highly educated, enjoyed making people afraid and uncomfortable, and would have had to have been a callous and sadistic person who liked hurting people. The letter writer smacked of someone suffering from a personality disorder, which would have meant they would present as a bully in their everyday life. If we take Paul Freshour at face value, most of these qualities don't fit him. For one, he was a highly educated manager at Anheuser-Busch and had a master's degree. Also, until Karen Sue's divorce proceedings, no one had ever known Paul to be violent, and he did not present to the general public as being a bully or callous. In fact, he was quite well liked in the community and at his job. No one but Karen Sue ever publicly stated that Paul was anything but a stand-up citizen, and based on the divorce proceedings, there was also ample evidence that after the divorce, he enrolled himself and his 2 daughters in therapy to help them deal with the trauma of their parents' disintegrating relationship. None of these things seem to match the profile of the letter writer. But perhaps the most interesting part of the FBI profile was that it's entirely possible that the Circleville letter writer was not actually a man.
Looking for excitement? Chumba Casino is here. Play anytime, play anywhere. Play on the train, play at the store, play at home, play when you're bored. Play today for your chance to win and get daily bonuses when you log in. So what are you waiting for? Don't delay. Chumba Casino is free to play.
Experience social gameplay like never before. Go to Chumba Casino right now to play hundreds of games, including online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Live the Chumba life at ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Chapter 4. Theory 2. Karen Sue Freshour. In her 48 Hours interview, O'Toole surmised that there was a good possibility the writer was claiming to be a man, but was in fact a woman. She stated this due to the fact that the writer works very hard, particularly in their early letters from the 70s, to establish that they are a man, which is not something an actual male writer would do. This has led to a second theory in which Karen Sue Freshour could have been the letter writer. For starters, All the letters she claimed were found in the home and most likely written by Paul could have just as easily been written by her. Likewise, there was a break in the letters between the 1970s and early 1980s, and the restart of the letters in the 1980s heavily corresponds with the disintegration of her marriage with Paul. While she may have had little motive in the 1970s to spread rumors about her sister-in-law and public officials, she had a lot of motive to frame Paul Freshour in 1982 after their divorce. Based on their divorce proceedings, Paul was granted custody of their daughters and the house. And while they were required to split the rest of their financial assets and Paul was required to pay alimony, it was reported that Karen Sue was not being paid the alimony and was living in a trailer with their son Mark on Mary Gillespie's property. When journalist Martin Yant was doing his own investigation, he found evidence of a witness who told police that she had seen a tall man with sandy-colored hair standing next to a yellow El Camino who was hanging out around the booby trap sign on the very day Mary Gillespie found it. As Paul Freshour was a short man with dark hair and he did not own an El Camino, this was a strange observation. But Martin Yant pointed out that at the time of the event, Karen Sue had begun dating a tall man with sandy-colored hair, and her brother owned an El Camino that matched this one, and she would have known where Paul's gun was in the garage, and it wouldn't have been difficult for her to have someone help her rig a booby trap. She may have taken the gun and rigged the booby trap, or had assistance doing it. Another possible piece of evidence was Karen Sue trying to stop the show Unsolved Mysteries from shooting an episode about the Circleville letters in town. According to Paul's family members, many of whom were asked to be interviewed by Unsolved Mysteries, Karen Sue called them and told them not to get involved. She also allegedly sat in her car across the street from the set and took photos of every person who went in for an interview. The crew of Unsolved Mysteries even received their own Circleville letter during the shoot, with the message, "Forget Circleville, Ohio. If you come to Ohio, you L sickos will pay." If Karen Sue Freshour was the letter writer, it's possible she tried to scare the show from coming to town and uncovering something that might lead to the truth. However, like the Paul Freshour theory, there's much evidence to prove that Karen Sue wasn't involved. Most importantly, after interviewing her several times and investigating the letters, the police never turned up any hard evidence to link Karen Sue to the letters or the booby trap. She was never considered a suspect by the police at any time. If she really had definitive proof that Paul was the Circleville letter writer, she could have brought it up during her divorce proceedings, and she never did. We do have some proof that Karen Sue may not have tried to cast Paul in a bad light because she was trying to protect her children. In an interview she did with journalist Martin Yant, she told him, "Believe me, I lost a lot. I could have done a whole lot more. I could have really, really portrayed this man to be what he really was and gotten a lot more. But I couldn't for the fact that I have kids. And believe me, that's what I'm trying to tell you. I love my kids a whole hell of a lot more than you'll ever know." There was also no motive for Karen Sue to have smeared her sister-in-law for so many years in the letter-writing campaign. The two were still very close, even after Karen Sue's divorce from Paul. So if Paul and Karen Sue weren't the letter writer, who was? Though unlikely, some speculate that Paul and Karen Sue's son Mark may have been involved. Some evidence would later point to that Mark was suffering from depression due to his parents' marital issues, and he had become withdrawn. Karen Sue also noted in her divorce papers that Mark was afraid of his father, and the two had some verbal altercations. And again, the letters found in the Freshour house could have actually been written by Mark instead of his parents. Mark also chose to live with his mother after their divorce, despite his father having custody of the children and the house, and it would have been easy for Mark to continue sending letters after his father was incarcerated. Paul's family also speculated that Mark may have been the one to have stolen his father's gun used in the booby trap. It's possible that, had Paul outed his son's involvement, more evidence could have been found to link him to the letters, but Paul never gave any names. Paul's family also speculates that Mark's untimely death by suicide in 2009 may have been an admission of guilt. Perhaps he wasn't the letter writer, but maybe he had rigged the booby trap that got his father put in prison. Because Mark never talked to police and died in 2009, we'll never know if that theory has any credence.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Chapter 5. A Mystery Unsolved. Paul Freshour passed away from a heart attack in 2012, so doing any new interviews or writing tests with Paul are out of the question. He went to the grave claiming his innocence and told Unsolved Mysteries in their 1994 episode, "I'd like to see someone really look at this case on the letters, reopen the letter part of it, and get in and find out who wrote the letters. I'd also like to see someone look into my former brother-in-law's death. Look, that's not my family anymore. That's my past. I'm not even going to look back at it. I've got a new family and a new future, but I would still like to see someone look at that accident real close and the letters." Should we believe in Paul's innocence? Journalist Martin Yant, who spent 30 years working on wrongful conviction cases, believes Paul was set up by someone else. While he wouldn't say whether or not he believed Paul was the letter writer, Yant stated on the record that Paul was certainly not given a fair trial, and that in the least, he was wrongfully convicted on the attempted murder charges. There was never any forensic evidence connecting Paul to the booby trap, and Yant speculates that the town just wanted a suspect to put away so they could say the case was closed. FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole worked up a profile that did not really line up with the Paul Freshour most people knew. But is it possible Paul had a sinister side unknown to even his family and closest friends? We've seen both serial killers and criminal masterminds hide their true nature from their families for decades, so it is possible that the FBI profile really did fit Paul. It just wasn't the personality he showed to the public. And there's the forensic handwriting specialist hired by 48 Hours. She told 48 Hours that she would be willing to go to trial and swear on a Bible that Paul Freshour was the letter writer. But it's important to point out that the examination of handwriting by documents examiners is not an exact science like DNA or fingerprints. It comes down to a person's opinion, that particular expert's opinion. And it's very possible that if you had several different experts look at the same documents, they may come to different conclusions. But if Paul Freshour was the writer, more investigation would need to be done to figure out how he was sending letters from prison, a seemingly impossible task. Some people have asked the question over the course of the 20 years these letters came in, could there have been more than one letter writer? And some speculate that it's possible, but the handwriting never seemed to change. And though police worked with the post office several times over the course of the 20-year investigation, no correlations could be made about where the letters were coming from. In a time before intense surveillance and digital tracking, it was almost impossible to figure out how all the letters were making it through the system. But the most interesting point in the Circleville letter saga was that they stopped for good, not only after Paul Freshour was released from prison, but also shortly after Unsolved Mystery aired their 1994 episode, called The Poison Pen. If Paul was the writer, was he afraid that being on the show would make it easier for people to connect him to the letters if he kept going? And if it was someone else, did the media attention brought by the show scare them into stopping their harassment? It remains a fascinating mystery to this day, and with each passing year, it becomes less and less solvable as more and more people who remember it or have the potential to contribute to the investigation pass away. We may never know who really terrorized the town for 20 years or why they decided to do it. But the letter writer forever put the sleepy town of Circleville on the map, and in the minds and imaginations of everyone who speculates on the case. Who do you think wrote the Circleville letters? Reach out to us on social media. We'd love to hear from you. For our listeners who want to know more about this case, we invite you to check out the following media: The Poison Pen episode of Unsolved Mysteries, the Circleville Letters by 48 Hours, and the Whatever Remains podcast hosted by Marie Mayhew. Thank you for joining us for this inaugural season of Killer Communications. We hope you'll join us again in Season 2. Is there a case or an unexplained communication you'd like us to cover? Please take the time to rate and review this show, and in your comments, tell us what case you'd like us to tackle. You can also follow us and reach us on social media. We're on x.com at KillerCPod, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KillerCommunicationsPodcast. And be sure to check out our website, KillerCommunicationspodcast.com. Killer Communications listeners, if you want to support this show and get access to things like ad-free listening, early release episodes, and any bonus content, consider supporting us with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, your AbJack Insider subscription will not only unlock all these great benefits for this show, but for every podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts. Get your AbJack Insider subscription started with a free trial. Simply head over to Apple Podcasts and search for AbJack Entertainment, and you'll find the option to set up and unlock your subscription and start enjoying all the benefits of being a subscriber. We'll also include a link in the show notes. Your support is greatly appreciated. Just a heads up, new episodes of Killer Communications air every other Saturday. Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us on the next episode of Killer Communications.
Killer Communications is narrated and produced by Mike Morford for AbJack Entertainment. It's researched and written by Abigail Belcastro. Be sure to visit the show's website, KillerCommunicationspodcast.com, for past episodes, social media links, show news, and more.